The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of November 10, 2024, the podcast that let the dogs out. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's accommodate the news of the bogus. Whew, boy. Yeah, we just had the election, and it's dominated the news cycle so much, it doesn't look like we're going to talk about much else. So, Trump won. By a lot. Even won the popular vote. Cue the screeching of the left and the sharing of all the clips of the screeching from the right. As I record this podcast, Trump has won 301 electors. 270 is needed, and Kamala only has 226. So he's got it in the bag. But Arizona hasn't called it yet because only 82% of precincts are reporting. Most of the remainder being from, guess where? Maricopa County. So yeah, they're doing their best, like they did in 2022 and 2020. They can't stop Trump from being elected, but there is a referendum that would enshrine the right of abortion up to viability, and another on immigration, as well as an open Senate seat where Kari Lake is challenging Ruben Gallego. He's currently ahead by a razor-thin 1.1% margin, with neither candidate having a majority. Trump's is a much heftier 6.4%. The right to abortion has a comfortable 22-point margin, and one giving police the power to arrest illegal immigrants is ahead 26.2 points. So it looks like it's all about the Senate race. The GOP has a 53-seat majority in the Senate, again with Arizona yet to be called. Bernie Sanders and Angus King were elected to independent seats in Vermont and Maine, respectively. Both of them caucus with Democrats. As for the House, we don't have an official majority yet as of this recording. 218 seats are needed for a majority, and the GOP has 212 to the Democrats' 200. The way things are leaning, it looks like it might end up being a 223 to 212 majority for the GOP, but it's not official. California seems to be the main holdout here. They have 10 congressional races still to call. By Wednesday morning, they had 54% of the vote counted. Now, on Saturday morning, it's just 63%. What is even going on? Even Arizona has more than that counted. What's with this wonderfully educated state that they've forgotten how to count all of a sudden? Is it anything to do with the fact that 6 of these districts are heavily leaning Republican? There were 10 states with referenda to enshrine abortion rights in some fashion, 7 of which passed and the others failed. They passed in Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, and New York. 4 of those states went to Trump, so it's not the case that Trump voters necessarily want abortion banned. They failed in Florida, Nebraska, and South Dakota. Florida and South Dakota went to Trump, but Nebraska splits its electoral votes, so Trump didn't get them all, despite getting over 60%. But there is the converse of what we just saw. No state that voted down abortion rights went to Kamala. All of that is easily explained by an outright rejection of Kamala Harris, even among many Biden voters. Here's how it sounded on CNN.
Are there any places that the vice president is overperforming Joe Biden in 2020? So we could show you that as well. We just bring that out here. Harris overperforming 2020.
Holy smokes.
There you go.
Literally nothing?
Literally nothing.
Literally not one county?
By 3% or more.
And of course, that resulted in the left screeching about how it was because of misogyny and not at all about how horrible their candidate was. Even though, as we just saw, abortion rights did well in so many states, which, by the way, is exactly the vision of the Supreme Court. The people are having their say, something that Roe v. Wade unconstitutionally denied them. As for other ballot measures, it was a really bad year for drug legalization, as referenda to legalize various drugs failed in Florida, Massachusetts, and both Dakotas, although medical marijuana did pass in Nebraska. Measures to strengthen citizen voting requirements passed in 9 states and failed in 1 other. Alaska and Missouri showed their ignorance of economics by passing a $15 minimum wage. I'm sure they'll have plenty of other things to blame the resulting unemployment on. Californians have learned their lesson. Their $18 minimum wage failed. And school choice measures did extremely poorly, despite most people supporting school choice. I mean, what? And that reverses all of the successes we've seen in previous elections. According to Neil McCluskey, director of the Cato Institute's Center for Educational Freedom, quote, "We see polling that typically shows people support school choice if you just sort of present them with, hey, we could give you money and then you could use it to go seek the education of your choice. Referenda for school choice are always at a disadvantage because you're trying to take on entrenched, easily organized interests who defend the status quo, and they can put a lot of money into defending the status quo and a lot of boots on the ground. And that's just too much for these small grassroots groups to overcome." Quote, "A lot of parents would probably like to have school choice, but they have regular jobs. They're not sure, even if school choice passes, that they're going to get it. They're not sure how to use it. But the status quo or the establishment knows that they could lose money, and they don't like that. You have a highly motivated, relatively easily organized group of people who will defend the status quo, and it's very hard to balance that out on the pro-school choice side, in large parts because parents can't go out every weekend and campaign for it." So, overall, the usual mixed bag, with the lesson being learned that you should never rely on a majority to do the right thing. Democracy is a form of tyranny, as people in favor of school choice and marijuana legalization just found out.
Sometimes you just have to stomp some skulls. From the mind of Mr. Dapperton, a game for the ages. In a world where a race of undead furries tries to take over the world's nuclear arsenal, one man must stop them. But which man? You choose. Dapperton, Elon,
Not my Dogecoins.
Joe,
Build me back.
Shapiro,
My kippa's ruined.
or Don John.
Ow, my ear.
Forget those losers. You know you want to play as me, Lord Killian. That's right. You can stomp the skulls of those commie furries and save the universe as me.
7 complete different worlds with more coming all the time. Full controller support. You can even get eaten by a worm and pooped out into a furry cathedral. You know you want this game. Go to links.bogosity.tv/skullstompers and play Skull Stompers now.
One thing that really made me nervous about a second Trump administration was RFK Jr. being put in charge of, well, anything. Especially after his recent Enough is Enough video.
Doritos, Cheez-Its, Captain Crunch, gummy bears. Everyone knows that these are junk foods, so maybe you wouldn't be too surprised to see that the ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called tetrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke for blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings.
Remember this, everyone. Tattoo it into the inside of your eyelids if you have to. There is no such thing as a toxic substance. Only a toxic dosage. The dose makes the poison. And with Trump talking about putting him in charge of the Department of Health and Human Services, this is really embarrassing. In his victory speech Tuesday night, Trump said,
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he came in. And he's going to help make America healthy again. And now he's a great guy, and he really means it. He wants to do some things, and we're going to let him go to it.
So RFK being that ignorant is not a good sign, especially when he says crap like this.
They didn't know back then that this yellow dye, tartrazine, causes tumors, asthma, developmental delays, neurological damage, ADD, ADHD, hormone disruption, gene damage, anxiety, depression, intestinal injuries. Well, we know it now. We've known this for decades.
No, we don't. The only thing we know is that if you give it to mice in large quantities, it can give them oxidative stress. It's never been shown to be harmful in humans, certainly not in the tiny amounts you get in foods. And even the murine studies aren't all that statistically significant. Just one example. He says it causes asthma. No, it does not! In fact, a Cochrane review showed that it doesn't even worsen the symptoms of asthma. And by the way, contrary to what he says in the video, tartrazine is allowed in Europe and Canada. RFK Jr. is just wrong.
I can make a video just like this to talk about Red 40, BHA, BHT, potassium bromate, chemical after chemical, and on and on and on.
And you'd be just as ignorant. A while back, I made a quickie about root beer. Basically, real root beer made by brewing saffron from sassafras root is illegal because feed a whole bunch of it to mice and they get cancer. But they get cancer because of a metabolic pathway that doesn't exist in humans. In humans, saffron actually interrupts a carcinogenic pathway and reduces the chance you'll get cancer. Same thing with Red 40, MSG, all sorts of things that have positively been shown to be safe for human consumption, but continue to be the boogeyman of people like RFK.
Enough is enough. President Trump and I are going to stop the mass poisoning of American children. Together, we're going to make America healthy again.
In other words, to quote Groucho Marx, if you think this country's bad off now, just wait till I get through with it. RFK Jr. would make our current regulatory state look like a drum circle. Our food would be so much worse, so much more expensive, and not even any healthier. It's seductive to say that it's not your fault you're unhealthy because of innocent ingredients they put in your food, as opposed to the overeating and imbalanced diets you people have. Nobody wants to hear that. Well, fortunately, this looks like one campaign promise Trump might be going back on. I mean, I expect him to break a lot of them, but this is one I actually want him to. Actually, I want him to break a lot of them, but we won't get into that. According to reports, advisors for Trump are seriously questioning whether or not having him on the cabinet is a good idea. You might want to be careful as you wade through this Telegraph article, though, because there's the stuff that they just do, like the long-debunked myth that a picture shows RFK Jr. eating dog when it's been independently confirmed to be lamb. But the news is, there's a big question of whether or not Kennedy could even get confirmed for a cabinet-level position, get a security clearance, or even if he'd want to go through the Senate confirmation hearings, given how much opposition he has from members of both parties and how brutally thorough a lot of them can be. He told MSNBC, quote, "Why do we have Fruit Loops in this country that have 18 or 19 ingredients and you go to Canada and it's got 2 or 3? So it's the amount of ingredients that's a problem? Not even whether or not he can pronounce them. You know, the food babe criterion." By the way, I looked online and the Kellogg's Fruit Loop sold in Canada has 26 ingredients. There are also reports that, as we knew all along, but as he's recently been pretending otherwise, he's as anti-vaccine as they come. And Trump, who is fully vaxxed and even got the COVID vaccine, just might find that a road too far. He's never given any indication that he wants to remove childhood vaccines the way RFK still wants to do. So as that veil drops, Trump might well drop him. Howard Lutnick, co-chair of Trump's transition team, told CNN's Caitlin Collins, quote, "He's not getting a job for HHS." He related to Collins, RFK repeated to him the long-debunked notion that autism, a genetic disorder, is actually caused by childhood vaccines. using a correlation-causation fallacy that's been debunked since it's all easily accounted for by increased screening and diagnoses. The roots of autism happen in early fetal development, long before the vaccines. It just so happens the symptoms tend to manifest around that time. So hopefully, no RFK Jr. in Trump's cabinet. Of course, none of this is confirmed, but here's hoping they're right. If Trump is serious about reducing the power of the regulatory state, getting RFK Jr. anywhere near the place is the wrong way to go about it.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.pagosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.pagosity.tv.
Okay, looking across the aisle at the kind of anti-Trump hysteria we can expect out of Democratic politicians, California Governor Gavin Newsom called a special session of lawmakers to figure out how to safeguard the state's policies from the Trump White House. New York Governor Kathy Hochul said that she was planning a similar meeting with Attorney General Letitia James and their senior staffers to protect, quote, key areas that are most likely to face threats from the Trump administration, including, quote, reproductive rights, civil rights, immigration, gun safety, labor rights, LGBTQ rights, and our environmental justice. Well, nice to see they all agree with state nullification for once. Respect for the 10th Amendment, finally, and Trump hasn't even taken office yet. Newsom said, quote, the freedoms we hold dear in California are under attack, and we won't sit idle. Attorney General Rob Bonta said his office has been reviewing more than 120 lawsuits in preparation for a second Trump term. Hey, Bonta, don't you have enough on your plate as it is? How many so-and-so v. Bonta cases have we covered on this podcast? Bonta said to look at the votes in California, quote, we rejected him. We rejected his values. We rejected his agenda. I am looking, Bonta. And it looks like it was just the coast and the Mexican border area that rejected him. What about that vast tract of red sweeping through the majority of the state? Besides, Kamala took the state with just 57.6% of the votes compared to the 63.5% that Biden got in 2020. She's down almost 6 full points. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey even fear-mongered about the long-debunked link between Trump and Project 2025, and they weren't the only ones. The problem is, so many of the things they want to do, as we've seen, are blatantly unconstitutional, especially violations of the First and Second Amendments that Bonta and the others have had to fight and lose for years. And Bonta even said, quote, I can promise to the undocumented immigrant community in California that I and my team have been thinking about you for months and the harm that might come from the Trump administration 2.0. We'll do everything in our power and use the full authority of your office to defend you. So he even thinks he can fight the federal government on immigration law? And defend them how? Is he going to put his own troops up against CBP? 'Cause, just being honest, I'd kind of like to see that. Senate President pro tempore Mike McGuire said, quote, California has come too far and accomplished too much to simply surrender and accept his dystopian vision for America. As opposed to non-dystopian things like not having any water because you paved the rivers and are diverting it all to the sea. including draining one of the biggest lakes west of the Mississippi and having rolling blackouts because of all the nuclear power plants the government stupidly and needlessly shut down. Not to mention the wildfires, homeless population, housing crisis, on and on and on. Seriously, I hope they follow through with all of this. It'll give me great material.
Do you have children or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins.
And now it's time to pictorialize this week's biggest bogon emitter. So here's one we haven't mentioned before. In all of our coverage of the Biden-Harris administration weaponizing the DOJ against their political enemies, because there are just so many of them we could never cover them all, but this week it goes to Assistant U.S. Attorney Tina Ansari, who is prosecuting Dr. Ethan Haim, the whistleblower who uncovered gender medicine procedures inflicted on minors at Texas Children's Hospital in violation of state law. To make this story even more delicious, she did so during a time where her law license had been suspended by the Texas bar. Ansari is accused of having, quote, knowingly sponsored false information and knowingly misled a tribunal and presented deliberately misleading information to a grand jury. In other words, in addition to practicing law with a suspended license, she's charged with lying to the grand jury to get Haim indicted. Dr. Haim revealed that the hospital, quote, secretly continued to perform transgender medical interventions, including the use of implantable puberty blockers on minor children, after having assured the public that it was no longer doing so. Haim did not disclose any confidential patient information or any other information federally protected by HIPAA. Ansari lied and claimed that Haim had disclosed individually identifiable health information, and also claimed that he had obtained the records illegally after completing his surgical rotation when he still had patients at the hospital, and Ansari and other prosecutors were perfectly well aware of it. Ordinarily, grand jury proceedings are secret, but Haim's lawyers are working to get them released in this case, since they would show Ansari was told by the hospital that Haim was continuing to treat patients while saying the exact opposite to the grand jury. That falls under a false information before the grand jury exception. His lawyers told the court, quote, the government has made material misleading statements to the grand jury. The defense should be permitted to review the relevant grand jury material. One of Haim's lawyers, Marcella Berg, said, quote, DOJ has charged Dr. Haim with a non-existent crime. At a charitable minimum, this is a reckless prosecution, and at its extreme, it is malicious prosecution. There are supposed to be whistleblower protections. When you have a children's hospital that's flagrantly violating the law, well, that's about as bad as you can get. So people should be thanking Haim for exposing criminal wrongdoing. Sadly, the DOJ and Ansari are engaging in yet another completely political prosecution of someone exposing exactly the kind of thing Kamala herself tried to claim was a myth and a conspiracy theory. So all of that makes Tina Ansari this week's biggest bogon emitter.
I want gotta tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now let's re-socialize this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. If anyone should understand the importance of the First Amendment, it's the news media. When they become the biggest voice for censorship, you know they're just an unofficial arm of the state. It's one of those things totalitarians rely on when those pesky voters elect someone they're not supposed to. Again, this was a very decisive victory for Trump, taking not only the Electoral College, but the popular vote and winning a majority of both houses for the Republicans as well. The traditional media knows this is bad, but of course most of them aren't willing to acknowledge that this is because they ran a horrible candidate who couldn't get a single vote when she ran for the Democratic primary, instead blaming Americans for being racist and sexist, with no acknowledgement of all the women and people of color these sexist racists did manage to elect somehow. I mean, for denial, just listen to Joy Reid on MSNBC.
Anyone who has experienced or been in the United States for any period of time and experienced this country's history and knows it cannot have believed that it would be easy to elect a woman president, let alone a woman of color. Let's just be clear. And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swiftie to the Swifties. She had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And I think that's still true.
Yeah, that's the criteria. If Queen Latifah endorses you, your campaign is perfect. Not at all out of touch or anything. The problem is, Harris lost ground against virtually every demographic, in minority white districts, in black and Hispanic districts, in college-educated districts. And so it's hard to understand why so many of these racist woman-hating voters would have voted for Hillary and Obama, but not Kamala. The next thing, pointed out by so many, and few less so than Jen Psaki, was so-called disinformation on platforms like X that were beyond the censorship engine of the Biden administration. Psaki has long called for Democrats to take action against social media companies to take tight control over the information they spread. Sarah Haynes said the same thing on The View.
We could regulate social media, because one of the biggest offenders is D.C. and Congress have not been able to do one thing in regard to the rogue corporations of social media.
It's not going to get any better with Elon Musk now in the administration.
This from the same people who insisted that Joe Biden was sharp as a tack? Yeah, disinformation like the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, or the false claim that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Just check the archives of this podcast to see how seriously you should take this. We also saw from the Twitter files what lengths the government was willing to go to in order to suppress information they knew was true and peg people as Russian assets when they knew they were American citizens with no ties to Russia. But that's the age-old tactic of fascists. Accuse your opposition of what you yourself are doing. It should be obvious how self-serving this is. Even when we ignore their ties to the administrative state, the old media is losing views and credibility to new media and social media. It's a direct threat to their profits and indeed their very existence. It's also why they have to go after alternatives like Rumble and Substack, where journalists can publish their findings directly to their audiences without relying on these legacy corporations. Such as Glenn Greenwald's expose on the U.S. being behind the Euromaidan coup in Ukraine, deposing the democratically elected government to put in one hostile to Russia, widely considered the direct cause of the now decade-long Russo-Ukrainian war. Or Seymour Hersh's revelations from his extensive contacts about the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, which the news media laughably tried to blame on Russia. The whole point of Section 230 is to protect online sources from this very kind of bullying from the government, of the kind that resulted in censorship on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And not only is there nothing more authoritarian than wanting to crack down on information sources because you don't like what they're saying, it is absolutely a First Amendment violation. The Supreme Court has said several times that coaxing, encouraging, threatening, colluding with, or otherwise incentivizing private companies to do something makes that private company a state actor. Government can't get a company to do by proxy what it wouldn't be allowed to do itself. And if even they don't think they can beat Trump without infringing on free speech, engaging in surveillance, and seizing control of the narrative, then all they do is show the world that they don't deserve to win. So all of that makes the news media this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this You Don't Want to Rule the World, You Wouldn't Know What to Do With It Beyond Shout At It edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Potter Stewart. Censorship reflects a society's lack of confidence in itself. It is a hallmark of an authoritarian regime. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.